Housekeeper fired for taking elderly woman to the hospital. But what her millionaire son does? Brenda Collins never imagined that saving a life could cost her job. The rain was pounding hard against the windows of the mansion in the upscale Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago when Mrs. Martha, 75 years old, slipped in the bathroom and hit her head. The 32-year-old housekeeper didn't hesitate for a single second at her employer's groan of pain. Mrs. Martha's son, Julian Sterling, a businessman who owned a chain of grocery stores called Heritage Grocers, had left clear orders for all the household staff. No medical expenses would be authorized without his express permission. Brenda knew the rules, but seeing the elderly woman on the floor, dizzy and confused, made her heart race with desperation. "Mrs. Martha, can you hear me?" Brenda asked, kneeling beside the older woman. "Brenda, my head, it hurts so much," murmured Mrs. Martha, trying to touch the spot where she'd hit it. The housekeeper saw a small spot of blood in her employer's grey hair and made a decision that would change everything. She picked up the phone and called Julian, but he didn't answer. She tried 3 more times, always getting his voicemail. His cell phone was always busy with important meetings, business that couldn't wait. "I'm taking you to the hospital now," said Brenda, helping Mrs. Martha to her feet. "But Julian, he's going to be angry," whispered the elderly woman. "It doesn't matter, Mrs. Martha. You need medical care." Brenda put a coat over her employer's shoulders and helped her down the stairs. The rain had intensified, and the strong wind was shaking the trees in the garden. The family car was in the garage, but Brenda didn't have the keys or permission to drive. She thought about calling a taxi, but Mrs. Martha was growing paler and more confused by the minute. As each moment passed, the housekeeper grew more worried. She had worked in that house for 5 years and knew the signs well when her employer wasn't feeling well. "Come on, Mrs. Martha, I'll carry you," said Brenda, crouching down so the elderly woman could climb onto her back. "No, dear, you'll hurt yourself. You don't weigh a thing, and the hospital is only 10 blocks from here." Brenda opened the mansion door and stepped out into the torrential rain. Mrs. Martha held on tightly to the housekeeper's neck, and Brenda began to run through the wet streets of the neighborhood. Her old sneakers slipped on the asphalt, but she didn't slow down. The streetlights lit the path as Brenda ran, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Mrs. Martha had been more than just an employer all these years. She had become a mother figure, offering advice, support, and even lending money when Brenda needed to pay for her own father's treatment. "Does it hurt a lot, Mrs. Martha?" Brenda asked without stopping running. "A little, but thank you, dear, for taking care of me." The older woman's words warmed Brenda's heart, even under the cold rain. She quickened her pace, passing other luxurious houses, imported cars parked, a world she knew only as an outside observer. Brenda had grown up in the south side of Chicago, the daughter of a housekeeper and a construction worker. She managed to finish high school while working part-time, always dreaming of a better opportunity. The job at the Sterling house had been a gift from fate, offering financial stability her family had never known. When they reached the 5th block, Brenda heard the sound of a car speeding up behind them. From the powerful engine noise, she immediately recognized Julian's silver Cadillac. Her heart raced, but she didn't stop running. "Brenda, stop right now," Julian shouted, honking insistently. The housekeeper looked over her shoulder and saw the businessman driving slowly beside her, the window down, rain getting into the car. His expression was furious, his face red with rage. "Mr. Julian, Mrs. Martha hit her head. She needs a doctor," Brenda shouted, continuing to run. "I told you not to leave the house without my permission. Go back immediately." "I'm not going back. She might have something serious." Julian sped up the car and stopped abruptly in front of them, blocking the path. He got out of the vehicle, instantly drenched in the rain, and walked toward Brenda with firm steps. "Put my mother down right now," he ordered, pointing his finger at the housekeeper. "She needs medical help, Mr. Julian," Brenda insisted, shielding Mrs. Martha with her arms. "I decide what my mother needs, not you." Mrs. Martha, still on Brenda's back, tried to intervene. "Julian, son, I really did hit my head. I'm feeling unwell." "Mom, you're going home now. Tomorrow, if necessary, I'll call the private doctor." Brenda couldn't believe what she was hearing. She looked at Julian's face, searching for any sign of concern for his mother, but saw only irritation and authoritarianism. She made a brave decision. "Excuse me, Mr. Julian," Brenda said, going around the car and running again toward the hospital. "You're fired! You hear me? Fired!" Julian shouted, running after them. The boss's words echoed in Brenda's mind, but she didn't slow down. Mrs. Martha was getting heavier on her back, likely due to fatigue and the possible head injury. The housekeeper knew she was making the right decision, even if it cost her job. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, continuing. Mercy General Hospital was at the end of the street, its lights shining through the rain like a beacon of hope. Brenda could feel Mrs. Martha trembling on her back, unsure if it was from cold or pain. Her own muscles were beginning to protest under the weight, but she ignored the discomfort. "We're almost there, Mrs. Martha. Hold on just a little longer," Brenda whispered. "You're an angel, dear," the elderly woman replied in a weak voice. Julian kept running after them, shouting threats about lawsuits and legal consequences. Some residents started coming out of their houses, curious about all the commotion in the rainy early morning. The scene was surreal, a housekeeper running with an elderly woman on her back, chased by a man in a soaked suit. When they finally reached the emergency room, Brenda was gasping and exhausted. She rushed through the automatic doors, shouting for help. 2 nurses immediately approached, bringing a stretcher for Mrs. Martha. "What happened?" one of the nurses asked, helping to transfer the elderly woman onto the stretcher. "She slipped in the bathroom and hit her head. She might have a concussion," Brenda explained, trying to catch her breath. "How long ago did this happen?" "About 40 minutes ago." The healthcare professionals immediately began evaluation procedures, checking Mrs. Martha's vital signs and examining the head wound. The elderly woman was conscious but clearly disoriented. It was at that moment that Julian arrived at the hospital, soaking wet and furious. He went straight to the reception desk, demanding to speak with the attending physician. "I'm that patient's son. I want all treatment stopped immediately," Julian said to the receptionist. "Sir, the patient is already being evaluated. You can wait in the waiting room," the employee replied, used to tense situations. "Don't you understand what I said? I did not authorize this treatment." Brenda approached timidly, still wet from the rain, hair plastered to her face. She knew she would face the consequences of her decision, but she didn't regret it. "Mr. Julian, I only wanted to help Mrs. Martha," she said, her voice low but firm. "You disobeyed my direct orders. You're fired. I don't want to see your face in my house again." The volume of Julian's voice drew the attention of other patients and hospital staff. An older nurse approached the group, trying to mediate the situation. "Please, keep calm. This is a hospital environment," the nurse said with authority. "This employee brought my mother here without my authorization," Julian explained. "Would you have preferred she left your injured mother at home?" the nurse asked, with a subtle tone of reproach. The nurse's question caught Julian off guard. He looked at Brenda, then at the door where his mother was being treated, and for the first time since he arrived, he seemed to consider the situation from a different perspective. Dr. Harrison Bennett, the attending physician, came out of the examination room where Mrs. Martha was being seen. He was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a serious expression. He addressed Julian directly. "Are you a family member of the patient?" "I'm her son, Julian Sterling. Your mother suffered a mild head trauma. We need to run some tests to rule out internal bleeding. The person who brought her in did the right thing," the doctor said, looking at Brenda with approval. "Doctor, I didn't authorize this treatment," Julian insisted. "Mr. Sterling, your mother arrived here conscious because she received prompt care. A delay of another hour or 2 could have significantly complicated her condition," Dr. Harrison explained in a professional but firm tone. Julian felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The reality of the situation began to penetrate his anger-clouded mind. He looked again at Brenda, who was trembling. She didn't know if from cold or nerves. "How old are you?" Dr. Harrison asked Brenda. 32, doctor. "And you carried a 75-year-old person on your back for 10 blocks in the rain?" "Yes, sir. She needed help." The doctor shook his head in admiration. In his 15-year career in the emergency room, he had rarely seen such dedication from a domestic employee. Most people in a similar situation would have waited for formal authorization or simply called an ambulance. "I'll be very direct with you," said Dr. Harrison, turning to Julian. "Your employee saved your mother's life tonight. The head wound caused a small internal bleed that, without treatment, could have led to serious complications." The doctor's words fell on Julian like an avalanche. He had spent the last 40 minutes focused on his violated authority, without considering that Brenda might have made the only correct decision possible in the situation. "Can I see my mother?" Julian asked, suddenly calmer. "Of course. She's stable now, but we want to keep her under observation for a few hours." As Julian entered the examination room to see Mrs. Martha, Brenda remained in the waiting room, feeling the weight of reality. She had lost her job, probably wouldn't receive her last few weeks of pay, and had no prospect of finding another job quickly without references. But at the same time, a sense of peace flooded her heart. She had done the right thing. Mrs. Martha was safe, receiving proper medical care. That was more important than any personal consequence she might face. A nurse's aide approached Brenda with a cup of hot coffee. "Here, dear, you need to warm up," the woman said gently. "Thank you," Brenda murmured, gratefully accepting the warm drink. "I've worked here for 20 years and rarely seen someone with your dedication. Most people would have waited for the sun to arrive. Mrs. Martha is like a mother to me. She couldn't leave her suffering." The aide smiled with understanding. She had seen many cases of domestic workers who developed deep bonds with their employing families, especially with elderly people in need of attention. In the office, Julian held his mother's hand as she rested on the stretcher. Mrs. Martha was more lucid after receiving pain medication, but still seemed fragile and tired. "Mom, how are you feeling?" asked Julian, genuinely worried for the first time that night. "Better, son." "Brenda. Where is Brenda?" asked Mrs. Martha, looking around. "She's outside, Mom." "Why did you yell at her, Julian? She saved my life." Julian lowered his head, avoiding his mother's questioning gaze. For the first time, he began to question his own attitudes and priorities. His obsession with financial control had almost cost the life of the most important woman in his existence. I was worried about unnecessary medical expenses," Julian explained, his voice sounding weak even to himself. "Unnecessary expenses?" repeated Mrs. Martha, with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "Julian, when was the last time you cared about me as a person, not as an expense?" His mother's question hit Julian like a well-aimed arrow. He tried to remember when he had spent quality time with her, talked about her feelings, or simply shown genuine affection. The only encounters he recalled involved discussions about expensive medications or professional caregivers. "Brenda talks to me every day," continued Mrs. Martha. "She knows I'm afraid of being alone, that I miss your father, that sometimes I wake up scared in the middle of the night. She brings me tea when I can't sleep and listens to my old stories without showing impatience." Julian felt a growing weight in his chest. His mother was describing a relationship of care and affection that he, as her son, should be providing. Instead, he had outsourced that role to employees and only worried about operational costs. "When you fired her in front of everyone here at the hospital, you broke my heart," said Mrs. Martha, tears in her eyes. "She risked her own job to save me, and you humiliated her publicly." "Mom, You what, Julian? Were you protecting your money, controlling your expenses?" Mrs. Martha's voice was growing stronger, fueled by years of accumulated hurt. "When did I become just an item in your household budget?" Dr. Harrison entered the office at that moment, carrying the results of Mrs. Martha's tests. He noticed the tension in the room but maintained his professional demeanor. "The scans showed no significant bleeding," he announced. "You can go home, but you need complete rest for the next 3 days and follow-up if there's any change in symptoms." "Doctor, my former employee. Is she still here?" asked Julian. "Yes, she's waiting in the waiting room, a very dedicated young woman." Julian helped Mrs. Martha get up from the stretcher and get dressed. They walked slowly to the waiting room, where Brenda sat on a plastic chair, still wet from the rain, an empty coffee cup in her hands. When she saw Mrs. Martha walking, Brenda immediately stood up, a smile of relief lighting up her tired face. "Mrs. Martha, you're okay," exclaimed Brenda, quickly approaching. "Thanks to you, dear," replied Mrs. Martha, hugging Brenda tenderly. Julian watched the embrace between his mother and the former employee, noticing the genuine concern and affection that shone through in the interaction. It was evident that there was a deep emotional bond between the two women, something he had completely ignored during Brenda's 5 years of work. "Brenda, I need to talk to you," said Julian, his voice softer than before. "Mr. Julian, I understand I'm fired. You don't need to explain," Brenda replied with dignity. "Please, give me a chance to speak." Brenda looked at Mrs. Martha, who nodded encouragingly. She followed Julian to a more secluded corner of the waiting room, prepared to hear possibly more recriminations. "Brenda, I made a serious mistake tonight," Julian began, his words coming out with difficulty. "The doctor said you saved my mother's life." "I just did what anyone would do, Mr. Julian." "No, you did much more than that. You risked your job, your financial stability to take care of her, and I treated you terribly for it." Brenda remained silent, not expecting this kind of acknowledgement from the boss she had always considered cold and calculating. "I want you to come back to work for us," Julian continued, "with a significant raise, and with full authority to make emergency medical decisions regarding my mother. Mr. Julian, Please, Brenda, my mother needs you, and I need to learn to be a better son. Maybe you can teach me how to truly care for the ones we love." Julian's offer was unexpected, but Brenda could see sincerity in his eyes for the first time. She looked at Mrs. Martha, who watched her with a hopeful expression. "I accept your offer to return, Mr. Julian, but with some conditions." "Name them." "I want you to spend at least 1 hour a day talking with Mrs. Martha, not about medicine or expenses, but about her life, her memories, her feelings." Julian hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "And I want authorization to set up a small emergency medical fund for situations like tonight," Brenda continued. "Agreed. And please stop treating Mrs. Martha like an expense. She's your mother, the woman who gave you life, and she deserves affection, not just basic care." Brenda's words echoed deeply in Julian's conscience. He extended his hand to her, sealing an agreement that was much more than professional. "Deal, Brenda. And thank you for saving my mother, and for saving me from myself." When they returned home, the rain had stopped, and the first morning sun began to appear on the horizon. Mrs. Martha slept deeply, medicated and safe in her own bed. Brenda prepared a hot tea for Julian before retiring to her room. "Brenda," Julian called before she went up the stairs. "Yes, Mr. Julian." "Tomorrow I want you to tell me about my mother. What she likes, what makes her happy, what she misses. I realized I know almost nothing about the most important person in my life." Brenda smiled for the first time that night. "It will be my pleasure, Mr. Julian. Mrs. Martha is an amazing woman. You'll be surprised by the stories she has to tell." In the early hours of the morning, while the house finally rested in peace, Julian stayed awake reflecting on the night's events. An employee had shown more love and courage toward his mother than he had shown in years. From that day on, the dynamics of the Sterling family would be completely transformed. Julian would discover that his mother had been an elementary school teacher for 40 years, that she had lost 2 babies before having him, that she still missed the love letters his father wrote during their courtship. Brenda would become more than an employee. She would be the bridge that reconnected mother and son, teaching them both about the true nature of family care. And Mrs. Martha, in her final years, would finally experience the attention and affection she had always deserved from her own son. The night that began with an accidental fall in the bathroom ended up being the beginning of a deep healing in a family that had lost its emotional essence, and all thanks to the courage of a woman who chose love over security, compassion over obedience. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the days following the dramatic night at the hospital, The routine of the Sterling mansion underwent profound changes. Julian, true to his word, began dedicating an hour daily to talk with Mrs. Martha. At first, the conversations were uncomfortable and forced, with long silences and superficial topics. "How was your day today, Mother?" Julian would ask, sitting rigidly in the armchair beside her bed. "Good, son. Brenda helped me organize the old photos," Mrs. Martha would reply, observing her son's evident discomfort. "That's good." And then an awkward silence filled the air until Julian found an excuse to leave. Brenda observed these attempts at connection with a mix of hope and concern, knowing that genuine changes take time to bloom. It was during the second week that the first significant change happened. Mrs. Martha was flipping through a photo album when she found a picture of Julian at age 6, dressed as a cowboy for a school party. "Do you remember this, son?" she asked, showing the photo. "Vaguely," Julian replied, moving closer to see better. "You cried so much because you wanted a real gun, not a toy. Your father had to explain for hours that real cowboys protect people, not hurt them." Julian took the photograph in his hands, observing his childlike face radiant with joy. A dormant memory began to awaken, the feel of the cowboy costume, the hat that was too big, the pride he felt when his classmates praised his outfit. "I remember the smell of the new clothes," he said, surprising himself with the clarity of the memory. "And do you remember the song you used to sing back then?" "Song?" Mrs. Martha began to hum a simple melody. "I'm a brave cowboy. I protect those in danger." Julian felt a shiver run down his spine. "I used to make up songs?" Julian asked, genuinely interested. "You made up entire stories about cowboys who saved lost puppies, who helped grandpas cross rivers, who shared food with hungry people." Miss Martha smiled tenderly. "You had a beautiful imagination and a generous heart." Julian was silent, processing this revelation about himself. The cold and calculating businessman of today had been a creative and selfless child. When had that transformation happened? At what point had he lost that ability to genuinely care about the well-being of others? "What happened to me, Mother?" Julian asked, his voice filled with a vulnerability he hadn't shown in decades. "Life happened, son. Pressures, responsibilities, disappointments, they shape our personality. But that generous boy is still inside you, just asleep." This conversation marked the beginning of a journey of rediscovery for Julian. He began to question many of his attitudes and priorities, not only in relation to his mother, but in all areas of his life. How did he treat his employees? What kind of businessman had he become? What was the true purpose of his wealth? Brenda observed these transformations with growing hope. Julian was becoming more present, more attentive, genuinely interested in Mrs. Martha's well-being. He started asking about her medications, worrying about her diet, noticing when she was feeling more or less up to it. One afternoon, while Brenda was preparing lunch, Julian sought her out in the kitchen with a thoughtful expression. "Brenda, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mr. Julian." "Why do you care so much about my mother? She's not your family." Brenda stopped chopping the vegetables and turned to face her boss's questioning gaze. It was a question she had asked herself many times. "When I first started working here, I was going through a very difficult time in my life," she began, choosing her words carefully. "My own mother had just passed away, and I felt very alone in the world." Julian nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Mrs. Martha didn't treat me like just an employee. She asked about my problems, offered advice, worried when I got sick. She became the mother figure I had lost. And my father, was he like that with you too?" Brenda smiled wistfully. Arthur had passed away 3 years ago, but she still missed their talks and his kindness. "Your father was a wonderful man. He always treated me with respect and dignity. When he got sick, taking care of him wasn't work, it was love. I barely kept up with his illness," Julian admitted, ashamed. "I was always traveling, closing deals, expanding the company. I left all the responsibility to you." "Your father understood, Mr. Julian. He was proud talking about your business successes. But he also mentioned he missed having his son around." Brenda's words hit Julian like a punch to the stomach. He had missed the last months of his father's life, chasing financial goals that now seemed empty and meaningless. "I was a terrible son, wasn't I?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You were an absent son, but not necessarily a bad one. The difference is there's still time to change that with Mrs. Martha." That conversation planted an even deeper seed of change in Julian. He began to question not just his family relationship, but his entire system of values and life priorities. That night, he walked into Mrs. Martha's room with an unusual proposal. "Mom, how about I take a few days off from the company and we take a trip together?" Mrs. Martha looked at her son with genuine surprise. Julian hadn't taken a vacation in 5 years, and the idea of a trip together seemed completely out of character. "A trip where, son?" "Wherever you want. Any place that has special meaning for you." Mrs. Martha was silent for a moment, processing the proposal. Then her eyes lit up with an idea. "There's a place I would love to revisit," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Where?" "Your father's family homestead in rural Kentucky. That's where we met, where we spent our honeymoon, where you were conceived." Julian had never visited that homestead. He vaguely knew of its existence from family stories, but had never shown interest in exploring his rural roots. The property had been sold decades ago, but the region still held the memories of his parents' youth. "Then let's go to Kentucky," Julian decided impulsively. "Seriously?" asked Mrs. Martha, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Seriously. And Brenda is coming with us to take care of you during the trip." Mrs. Martha's joy was contagious. She immediately started planning the trip, telling stories about the region, describing landscapes Julian had never seen. For the first time in years, she showed an energy and vitality that seemed to have been lost. Brenda was moved by the invitation to join the trip. It was clear that Julian was genuinely making an effort to rebuild his relationship with his mother, and she felt honored to be part of that process. The preparations for the trip took up the following week. Julian cancelled important meetings, delegated responsibilities to his executive team, and for the first time in his business career, he put family before work. During the preparations, Mrs. Martha incessantly told stories about the time she met Arthur. It was as if the prospect of the trip had unlocked a treasure trove of stored memories. "Your father was the most handsome man in the region," she said, her eyes shining. "But he was also too shy to ask me to dance at the fairs. He would just watch from afar, sighing like a lovesick poet." "And how did you two finally meet?" Julian asked, genuinely interested in his parents' story. "It was at a summer solstice fair. He was helping organize the square dance, and I was wearing a yellow dress that my mother had sewn especially for the occasion. When a waltz started playing, he finally gathered his courage and held out his hand to me." "And did you accept?" "Of course. I had been waiting for that invitation for months," Mrs. Martha laughed. "We danced all night, and when the fair ended, he walked me home slowly to prolong our time together." Julian listened to these stories with growing fascination. His parents had lived a genuine love story, full of romance, partnership, and tenderness. He had never bothered to learn these intimate details of family life. "And when did you get married?" 2 years later. Your father worked hard to save up enough money for the ceremony and our little house. He sold fruit at the market, helped with the coffee harvest, did any honest job to save up for our future. He never told me those stories," Julian said, with a pang of regret. "You never asked, son, and when he tried to tell you, you were always in a hurry, busy with some business emergency." Mrs. Martha's gentle criticism hit Julian deeply. He realized how many opportunities he had missed to truly know his parents as people, not just as providers or obligations. On the eve of the trip, Julian sought out Brenda again, this time with an unexpected proposal. "Brenda, I'd like to raise your salary by 50%, he announced without preamble. "Mr. Julian, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is, and there's more. I want to formalize a full health insurance plan for you and set up a retirement fund. You've taken care of my family for 5 years. It's only fair that I take care of you too." Brenda was speechless. The salary increase represented a financial security she had never imagined possible. More importantly, it showed genuine recognition of the value of her work and dedication. "Thank you, Mr. Julian. This means so much to me." It means a lot to me too, Brenda. You saved much more than my mother's life that night. You saved our family. The trip to Kentucky began on a sunny Saturday morning. Julian hired a private driver for the 6-hour journey, ensuring maximum comfort for Mrs. Martha. Along the way, she pointed out familiar landscapes, told stories about each town they passed, reliving memories from decades past. "That's where we used to stop for lunch when we visited your father's family," she said, pointing to a small roadside restaurant. "Your father always ordered southern fried chicken, and I chose catfish with grits." "We can stop there today if you'd like," Julian offered. "Really? The restaurant still exists?" They made an unexpected stop at the small establishment, which still had the same rustic and welcoming decor from decades ago. The owner, a woman around 60 years old, immediately recognized Mrs. Martha. "Well, if it isn't Martha," the woman exclaimed, hugging her warmly. "How long has it been since you last came around here?" "More than 15 years, Peggy," Mrs. Martha replied, emotional at the reunion. "And this must be Julian. Boy, how you've grown. Last time I saw you, you were about 10 years old and always chasing the chickens in the backyard." Julian smiled, surprised to be remembered after so many years. Peggy led them to a special table near the window overlooking the mountains and insisted on personally preparing the traditional lunch. During the meal, Mrs. Martha and Peggy shared stories about families, mutual friends, and changes in the area. Julian listened, fascinated, discovering aspects of family life he knew nothing about. "Your father was known throughout the region for his honesty," Peggy told him. "When he opened the first grocery store in town, there was never a single complaint about prices or quality. He treated customers like family." "I didn't know my father started with a small grocery store in the countryside," Julian said, surprised. "That's where it all began, son," Mrs. Martha explained. "Your father dreamed of expanding the business to Chicago, but he never forgot his humble roots. He always said success without values is worthless." This revelation deeply impacted Julian. His company had grown through aggressive market strategies, fierce competition, maximizing profits at any cost. Had he lost the fundamental values that inspired his father to start a business? After lunch, they continued their journey to the main destination, the small town where his parents met and fell in love. The area had changed significantly over the years, but it still retained the rural charm and tranquility that Mrs. Martha remembered fondly. The hotel where they stayed was simple but comfortable, with a view of the mountains that had witnessed the romance of Arthur and Martha. That first night, the three of them had dinner on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. "It's here that I feel your father is still present," Mrs. Martha said, her voice soft and contemplative. "In the mountains, in the wind, in the stars we used to admire together." Julian observed his mother's serene expression and felt a deep connection to something he had forgotten, the ability to appreciate simple, meaningful moments. In Chicago, he was constantly on the go, always focused on the next goal, the next achievement. "Mom, are you happy?" Julian asked, a question he had never asked before. "I'm happy now, son. Having you here with me, talking for real, learning about our history, that makes me very happy." "And before? Were you happy living alone in the mansion, taken care of only by staff?" Mrs. Martha hesitated before answering, weighing her words carefully. "I was comfortable, son. I had everything I needed materially. But happiness comes from human connection, from love, from feeling that we matter to someone. And that had become rare in our family." The honesty of the answer cut Julian's heart. He had provided his mother with material comfort, but he had failed to offer what she needed most: presence, attention, genuine love. "I'm going to change that, Mom, I promise." "You're already changing it, son. This trip, these conversations, this time together, it's everything I've ever wanted." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing, the next day Mrs. Martha guided Julian and Brenda on a tour of the most significant locations of her youth. First, they visited the church where she and Arthur were married, a small colonial building with white walls and a simple altar. "It was here that I promised to love your father forever," she said, gently touching the wooden pews. And I kept that promise until the last day of his life. How did you manage to keep the love alive for so many years? Asked Julian, genuinely curious about the secret of his parents' lasting relationship. Mutual respect, son. Daily conversation about everything and nothing. Quick forgiveness after the inevitable fights. And most of all, we never lost the ability to surprise each other. Surprise each other how? Your father brought me wildflowers he picked on his way to work. I prepared special dishes on anniversaries that only we two knew about. Little gestures of affection that kept the flame alive. Julian reflected on his own marriage, which had ended in divorce 5 years ago. He had been unable to maintain a lasting relationship, always prioritizing work over family, ambition over intimacy. His mother's advice came too late to save his marriage, but maybe there was still time to apply it to future relationships. Next, they visited the house where Mrs. Martha had lived as a child. The property now belonged to another family, but the new owners kindly allowed her to visit the backyard and relive memories of her youth. It was here that I played dolls with my sisters, she said, pointing to a large tree at the far end of the yard. And it was under this mango tree that your father gave me our first kiss. Julian smiled, as he imagined his parents as young lovers, living the first moments of a romance that would last decades. There was something deeply moving about being in the exact place where his own existence had been conceived through the love of two people. "Brenda, do you have a boyfriend?" asked Mrs. Martha, including the employee in the family conversation. "No, Mrs. Martha. I haven't found anyone special yet," Brenda replied, a little embarrassed by the personal question in front of her boss. "A kind and dedicated woman like you will surely find someone wonderful," said Mrs. Martha with conviction. "True love always finds its way." Julian watched Brenda during this exchange, noticing for the first time how attractive and intelligent she was. In the 5 years she had worked for his family, he had never considered her personal life, her romantic dreams, her aspirations beyond the domestic work. "Brenda, what kind of man do you admire?" asked Julian, surprising both her and himself with the question. "Well, someone kind, who treats people with respect, who values family and genuine relationships," she replied, not realizing she was describing exactly the qualities Julian had recently started to develop. During the rest of the afternoon, they visited other significant places: the school where Mrs. Martha had studied, the square where she and Arthur used to date, the church where he had asked for her hand in marriage. Each place awakened new stories, revelations about the character and values that had shaped the personalities of Julian's parents. At the end of the day, they had dinner at a traditional restaurant in town, known for serving authentic Kentucky home cooking. The atmosphere was rustic and welcoming, with wooden tables, simple decor, and a menu that hadn't changed in decades. "This was your father's favorite restaurant," Mrs. Martha said. "He used to say the food here tasted like home, like family, like tradition." Julian tasted each dish with renewed attention, trying to connect with the flavor memories his father had carried. The baked beans, the farm-raised chicken, the collard greens, each taste told a story of simplicity and authenticity that had been lost in his sophisticated urban life. During dinner, a young acoustic singer began playing traditional country music on a small platform in the corner of the restaurant. The melodies stirred deep emotions in Mrs. Martha, who started humming a few songs she recognized from her youth. "Your father used to play the guitar," she revealed, her eyes welling up with nostalgia. "He composed a song for me during our courtship. He never played it for anyone else. It was our secret song." "I never knew my father was a musician," said Julian, impressed by yet another discovery about his dad. "He was talented at many things. Music, cooking, gardening. But most of all, he was talented at loving. It was impossible to spend time with your father and not feel special and valued." Julian felt a pang of sadness as he realized how little he knew about the person who had given him life. Arthur had been far more than a provider or a father figure. He had been a complete man with passions, talents, and an extraordinary ability to connect with people. "Why did he never teach me to play the guitar?" Julian asked. "He tried a few times when you were a child, but you were always more interested in video games and computers. Eventually, he gave up insisting." Yet another missed opportunity to connect with his father. Julian began to mentally catalogue all the wasted moments, all the life lessons he had rejected in favor of material goals and shallow ambitions. The next morning, Mrs. Martha guided them to the most meaningful place of the trip, the old family homestead of Arthur. The property had been sold many years ago, but the current owners, knowing the family history, allowed a special visit. The homestead retained its original structure, a main house with colonial architecture, surrounded by vast pastures, orchards, and a small chapel where 3 generations of the family had prayed. The atmosphere breathed history, tradition, and rural values that had shaped Julian's father's character. "It was on this porch that your father proposed to me," said Mrs. Martha, pointing to a wooden bench under a flowering vine. He had prepared a long romantic speech, but when the moment came, he could only mumble, "Marry me?" and hold out a simple ring he had bought with months of savings. "And did you accept right away?" "I had been waiting for that proposal for weeks. Of course I accepted, but first I made him repeat the question properly with all the beautiful words he had prepared." Julian imagined the scene, his parents young, in love, planning a future together in that peaceful, bucolic setting. There was a purity and sincerity in that time that stood in dramatic contrast to the complexity and artificiality of his current life. They spent hours exploring the property. Mrs. Martha showed him the orchard where she and Arthur would pick fruit during their courtship, the creek where they had picnics, the field where they held their wedding celebration for the entire rural community. "Was your honeymoon right here at the homestead?" Julian asked. "Yes, son. We didn't have money to travel, so your grandmother prepared a special room in the main house, and we spent 2 weeks taking care of the property and learning what it meant to be married." "And is this where I was conceived?" Mrs. Martha blushed slightly, but smiled tenderly. "Yes, son. In that room with a view of the mountains, surrounded by the love and blessings of generations of your father's family." Julian felt a deep connection to his roots in that moment. He had been born not merely from a physical act, but from a genuine love story, in a place where family values were sacred and human relationships took precedence over material achievements. Brenda discreetly observed the interactions between mother and son, noticing how Julian was gradually changing. Her posture had become more relaxed, her expressions softer, her attention genuinely focused on her mother's words and feelings. During lunch at the homestead, prepared by the current owners as a gesture of hospitality, Mrs. Martha shared more stories about the philosophy of life that guided Arthur. "Your father always said that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in meaningful relationships," she told him. "He would rather help a neighbor in need than increase his bank account." "But he built a successful company," Julian argued. "Yes, but he never lost sight of why he was working. The goal was to provide security and opportunities for our family, not to accumulate wealth for the sake of accumulation." "And what was the difference?" "He knew when enough was enough, son. When we had a comfortable home, money for emergencies, and the opportunity to educate you properly. He began to focus more on quality of life than quantity of possessions." Julian reflected on his own business motivation. When was the last time he had questioned why he was accumulating more money? What was the ultimate purpose of his growing wealth if it didn't result in greater happiness or human connection? After lunch, they visited the small chapel on the property, where generations of the family had celebrated weddings, baptisms, and important moments. The space was simple, but deeply spiritual, with wooden benches worn by time and an atmosphere of peace that transcended religious denominations. "This is where your father came when he needed to make important decisions," Mrs. Martha said. "He wasn't overly religious, but he believed sacred places help connect us with our inner wisdom." Julian sat on one of the benches, trying to absorb the tranquility of the environment. In Chicago, his business decisions were made quickly, based on financial data and market analysis. He had never considered the importance of spiritual or ethical reflection in the decision-making process. What kind of decisions did my father make here? Whether to expand the business, how to raise you, when it was time to partially retire to enjoy more family time. He always weighed whether his choices honored the values he learned on this homestead. And what were those values? Honesty, generosity, humility, unconditional love for family. He believed that success without those values was false and temporary. Julian realized at that moment how far he had strayed from the principles that guided his father. His company was profitable, but he had cut employee benefits to maximize profit margins. His family relationships had been sacrificed in the name of business ambition. His personal life was empty of genuine connections. In the late afternoon, they climbed a small hill that offered a panoramic view of the region. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with golden hues that reflected over the green fields and distant mountains. "This was your father's favorite spot," Mrs. Martha said. "He would come here when he wanted to think, plan the future, or simply give thanks for the blessings received." Julian observed the magnificent landscape, feeling an inner peace he hadn't experienced in years. The natural beauty, combined with the family stories and his mother's presence, created a moment of transcendence that connected him with something greater than his individualistic goals. "Mom, I want to change my life," Julian said, surprising himself with the spontaneous declaration. "What do you mean, son?" "I want to be more like my father. I want my company to reflect family values. I want to prioritize relationships over profits. I want to be the man he hoped I would become." Mrs. Martha held her son's hand with tenderness, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "Your father would be very proud to hear those words, Julian, and it's never too late to start over." That night at the hotel, Julian couldn't sleep. His mind buzzed with plans and possibilities for transformation. He wanted to restructure his company to be more humane and socially responsible. He wanted to mend personal relationships he had neglected. He wanted to honor his father's memory through concrete actions, not just words. Brenda was also awake, reflecting on the events of the past few days. She had witnessed a genuine transformation in Julian, seeing character qualities emerge that had lain dormant under years of business pressure and excessive ambition. The next morning, the last day of the trip, Mrs. Martha had one final surprise prepared. She had contacted an old family friend who still lived in the area and knew the exact spot where Arthur had proposed to her. "I want you to see the place where it all began," she said to Julian, "where your father made the most important decision of his life, to build a family based on true love." The spot was a small hill overlooking a green valley, marked by a century-old tree whose branches offered natural shade. It was a place of simple but deeply romantic beauty, perfect for intimate moments and declarations of love. "It was here, under this tree, that your father told me for the first time that he loved me," Mrs. Martha recounted, gently touching the tree trunk. "And it was here that I promised to love him forever, regardless of the difficulties we would face." Julian absorbed the sacredness of the moment and the place. His parents had built an entire life on foundations laid in that specific spot, promises of love, fidelity, companionship, and mutual support through all circumstances. "Did they keep those promises?" Julian asked. "Religiously, son. We went through tough times, financial problems, my difficulty getting pregnant, your grandfather's illness, your own teenage challenges. But we always came back to the promises made under this tree." "What kept you together during the hard times?" "The reminder that we chose to be together not only in the good times, but especially in the bad. True love isn't a feeling that comes and goes. It's a decision we renew every day." Julian understood at that moment why his own marriage had failed. He had treated the relationship like a business contract, not a partnership based on unconditional commitment and mutual growth. As they prepared to return to Chicago, Julian made an important decision. He wanted to establish family traditions that honored his father's memory and strengthened his relationship with his mother. "Mom, I'd like us to make this trip every year," he proposed. "To remember our roots, strengthen family bonds, and keep alive the values Dad taught us. That would make me very happy, son. And I want Brenda to always come with us. She's part of our family, even if not by blood." The inclusion of Brenda in the family traditions surprised and deeply moved the employee. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly part of something greater than her own individuality. During the drive back to Chicago, the atmosphere in the car was completely different from the trip there. There was a lightness, a genuine connection among the three occupants that transcended social hierarchies or employment relationships. Julian shared plans to transform his company, implement more humane policies for employees, and establish social responsibility programs. Mrs. Martha offered advice based on the wisdom she had accumulated over decades of life. Brenda contributed practical perspectives on how changes could positively impact people in situations similar to hers. "Mr. Julian, may I make a suggestion?" Brenda said timidly. "Of course, Brenda, your opinion is very important to me. Perhaps you could start by offering health insurance to all company employees. Many people work while sick because they have no alternative for medical treatment." "Excellent idea. I'll implement that immediately." "And paid leave for employees to care for sick family members," suggested Mrs. Martha. "Family should always take priority over work." Julian mentally noted all the suggestions, realizing how disconnected he had been from the real needs of the people who worked for him. His business perspective was about to undergo a complete revolution. When they finally arrived in Chicago, the mansion looked different to Julian's eyes. What once represented status and material achievement now felt cold and impersonal. He began planning changes to make the house more welcoming and functional for creating genuine family memories. That night, during their daily hour-long conversation with Mrs. Martha, she made a remark that would deeply mark Julian. "Son, this trip showed me the wonderful man you can be when you connect with your true values. Your father would be proud of the transformation happening in you." "Thank you, Mom, and thank you for giving me the chance to know my own story." "The story is being written now, Julian. The past teaches us, but it's the present that defines who we choose to be." In the weeks following the trip, Julian implemented significant changes in his company. He established comprehensive health insurance for all employees, created family leave programs, raised salaries to reflect the real cost of living, and implemented flexibility policies for working parents. The initial changes met resistance from some shareholders, focused solely on profits, but Julian was determined to build a company that reflected the values he learned at his father's homestead. "Profits are important, but people come first," he declared during a tense board meeting. "If we can't succeed while treating employees with dignity, then we don't deserve success." Julian's transformation did not go unnoticed by the employees. For the first time in years, the work atmosphere became more collaborative and humane. People felt valued as individuals, not just as productive resources. Brenda watched these changes with growing admiration. The cold, authoritarian man she had known was being replaced by someone empathetic, generous, and genuinely concerned about others' well-being. One afternoon, while organizing travel documents in Julian's office, she found something unexpected: a notebook where he had begun writing memories of the trip and reflections on the lessons learned from his mother. "Today, I understand that my father didn't build a company to accumulate wealth, but to create opportunities for dignity for other families," read one of the notes. "I want to honor that vision by turning my company into a force for good in the community." Brenda was touched by the depth of Julian's reflections. It was clear that the trip had planted seeds of transformation that would continue to grow and bloom for years. That same day, Julian made a decision that would surprise his entire family and social circle. He announced that he would reduce his workload to spend more time with Mrs. Martha and develop social impact projects. "I want to create a foundation in my father's name," he explained to his mother during their daily conversation, "focused on education for low-income youth and support for vulnerable families." "What a wonderful idea, son. Your father always believed that education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty. And I want you to be the honorary president of the foundation. Your experience as a teacher would be invaluable." The proposal to involve Mrs. Martha in meaningful social work rekindled a sense of energy and purpose she hadn't felt in years. At 75, she would once again have the opportunity to contribute positively to the education and development of young people. The foundation would be more than just a philanthropic organization. It would be an extension of the family values Julian had rediscovered during his trip to Kentucky. Each program offered would reflect the principles of dignity, opportunity, and holistic human development that had guided Arthur's life. Brenda was invited to take part in planning the foundation, contributing practical perspectives on the real needs of low-income families. Her life experience offered valuable insights that complemented Julian's idealistic vision and Mrs. Martha's educational wisdom. "I want you to consider leading our family support program," Julian proposed to Brenda during a planning meeting. "Mr. Julian, I don't have the academic background for that. You have something more valuable, real experience and genuine compassion. We can arrange formal training, but your ability to connect with people can't be taught." The proposal represented a career opportunity Brenda had never imagined. From domestic worker to social program coordinator was a leap that seemed impossible, but Julian was determined to value natural talents over formal credentials. Over the following months, the three worked intensely on developing the foundation. Mrs. Martha contributed decades of educational experience, Julian provided resources and business connections, and Brenda offered practical perspectives on implementing social programs. Working together further strengthened the bonds between them. They were no longer just employer and employee, but partners united by a common mission of positive social impact. The meetings were held in the living room of the mansion, with coffee brewed by Brenda and an atmosphere of horizontal collaboration that would have been unthinkable months earlier. One day during one of those meetings, Mrs. Martha made an observation that deeply touched both Julian and Brenda. "Do you realize we're creating exactly the kind of family environment I've always dreamed of having? People who genuinely care about each other, working together for something greater than individual interests." Julian looked at Brenda in that moment and felt something he hadn't expected, a genuine romantic attraction based on respect, admiration, and shared values. She had become much more than a dedicated employee. She was an intelligent, compassionate woman aligned with his new vision of life. Brenda had also noticed the transformation in Julian, seeing character qualities emerge that deeply attracted her. The cold, authoritarian man had been replaced by someone kind, generous, and committed to making a positive difference in the world. But both hesitated to explore these feelings due to the complexity of the situation. She was still technically his employee. There were significant socio-economic differences, and any romantic relationship could complicate the family dynamic that had developed so harmoniously. It was Mrs. Martha, with her decades of life wisdom and keen observation, who first noticed the growing romantic tension between Julian and Brenda. "Julian, can I speak frankly with you?" she said during one of their evening conversations. "Always, Mom." "You're in love with Brenda." Julian was surprised by his mother's direct observation, but couldn't deny what she had identified. "Is it that obvious?" "To me it is, and I believe she feels the same way about you." "But Mom, it's a complicated situation." "Why?" "Because she works for our family, because she comes from a humble background. Her father was the son of poor homesteaders, and that didn't stop our true love." Comparing it to his own parents' story helped Julian see the situation in a new light. Genuine love transcends social or economic differences, especially when built on shared values and mutual respect. "What do you suggest I do?" "Be honest with your feelings, son. Life is too short to waste opportunities for real connection." The following week, the foundation was finally officially launched. The inauguration ceremony took place at a community center in the neighborhood where Brenda had grown up, symbolizing the commitment to serving communities that needed support the most. During his opening speech, Julian publicly thanked the two women who had transformed his outlook on life. "This foundation exists thanks to the wisdom of my mother, Martha, who taught me the value of compassionate education, and to the dedication of Brenda Collins, who showed me the true meaning of caring for others like family." The public acknowledgement deeply moved Brenda, who had never received such validation of her worth and contributions. Mrs. Martha smiled proudly, seeing her son publicly honor the relationships that truly mattered in his life. After the ceremony, Julian asked to speak privately with Brenda. They walked to a small garden adjacent to the community center under the soft light of the crescent moon. "Brenda, I need to tell you something I've been holding in for weeks," Julian began, nervous but determined. "What is it, Mr. Julian?" First, stop calling me Mr. We're partners now, equals in mission and purpose. Brenda smiled, noticing how Julian had freed himself from the hierarchical formalities that characterized their initial relationship. And second, I've fallen in love with you. Not with the dedicated employee, but with the extraordinary woman you are. Compassionate, intelligent, courageous, committed to making a difference in people's lives. Julian's words stopped Brenda's world for a moment. She had dreamed of this confession, but never believed it could come true. Julian, I've fallen for you too. For the person you've become, for the values you've chosen to embrace, for the genuine transformation I've witnessed. The kiss that followed sealed not just a new romantic relationship, but also the union of two people who had found in themselves and in each other the qualities needed to build something beautiful and lasting. When they returned to the mansion that night, Mrs. Martha was waiting for them in the living room with a knowing smile. From the sparkle in your eyes, I imagine you finally talked about the obvious feelings, she said with maternal satisfaction. Mom, Brenda and I, Julian began, you've fallen in love, just as I knew you would. And now we're going to plan a wedding worthy of your love story. The prospect of marriage still felt surreal to Brenda, but Mrs. Martha was already mentally organizing a celebration that would honor both the bride's humble origins and the family traditions of the groom. I want you to get married at the homestead in Kentucky, Mrs. Martha declared. At the same place where your father proposed to me. It would be a perfect way to connect our family's past, present, and future. The idea of marrying at the place where it all began for the Sterling family touched Julian deeply. It would be a way to honor his father's memory and lay solid foundations for his own marriage. In the following months, while planning the wedding, Julian, Brenda, and Mrs. Martha continued developing the family foundation. The educational programs were positively impacting hundreds of young people, offering opportunities that could transform entire life trajectories. Brenda had naturally adapted to the role of social program coordinator, showing an innate talent for connecting with families in need and developing practical solutions for complex challenges. Her personal experience of overcoming hardship offered hope and inspiration to people facing similar struggles. Julian discovered that leading an organization with a social purpose was infinitely more rewarding than simply maximizing corporate profits. Every life positively impacted by the foundation represented a more significant victory than any previous financial achievement. Mrs. Martha, at 75 years old, had found new purpose and energy through educational work. Her experience as a teacher, combined with decades of life wisdom, offered valuable guidance to young people navigating academic and personal challenges. Working together at the foundation also revealed a beautiful truth. They had become a genuine family, not just through legal or blood ties, but through a conscious choice to support, care for, and grow together. 1 year after the dramatic night that began with a fall in the bathroom, they gathered to reflect on the extraordinary transformations that had occurred in their lives. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be married to you and running social programs, I'd think I was crazy, said Brenda, now wearing a simple but meaningful engagement ring chosen by Julian. And if they'd told me I'd find more personal satisfaction helping needy families than piling up corporate profits, I wouldn't have believed it either, Julian replied. And I never imagined that at 75 I'd be more active and happier than I'd been in decades, added Mrs. Martha. The conversation took place in the same spot in the mansion where it all began, the bathroom where Mrs. Martha fell, and Brenda made the courageous decision that changed everything. But now the space was completely renovated, with grab bars and modifications ensuring full accessibility for the elderly woman. Do you know what the most incredible part of this whole story is? Said Mrs. Martha, looking affectionately at the couple. What? Asked Julian and Brenda in unison. It wasn't a coincidence that I slipped that night. It was destiny creating an opportunity for our family to find its true path. Mrs. Martha's spiritual interpretation gave new meaning to the events that had changed their lives. What initially seemed like a traumatic accident had revealed itself to be the catalyst for profound and positive transformations. On the eve of the wedding, which was to take place at the homestead in Kentucky, as planned by Mrs. Martha, Julian took one last reflection on the journey that had led them to that moment. He had lost a previous marriage by prioritizing work over relationships. He had nearly lost his mother by neglecting proper family care. He had built a profitable company, but one empty of significant social purpose. But through the courageous love of an employee who risked everything to save someone she loved, he had rediscovered the values that truly mattered: family, compassion, service to others, genuine human connection. Brenda, for her part, had gone from a domestic employee to a romantic and professional partner of a successful businessman. But more importantly, she had found a family that valued her contributions and an opportunity to positively impact hundreds of other families through social work. Mrs. Martha had found renewed purpose in the final years of her life, going from a lonely elderly woman to an active matriarch of a thriving and socially engaged family. Her wisdom and experience finally received the recognition and application they deserved. The wedding took place on a sunny spring afternoon under the same tree where Arthur had proposed to Martha decades earlier. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, uniting not just two people but connecting the past, present and future of the Sterling family. During his wedding vows, Julian promised Brenda not only romantic fidelity, but a shared commitment to the values they had learned together, prioritizing relationships over material achievements, serving communities in need, honoring healthy family traditions. Brenda promised Julian unconditional support in his journey of personal growth, partnership in building a meaningful family legacy, and continued dedication to the loving care of Mrs. Martha as long as she lived. Mrs. Martha, informally officiating the ceremony as the family matriarch, blessed the union with words that summed up the wisdom accumulated over 75 years of life. True love is not found, it is built. Through daily choices of kindness, forgiveness, mutual growth and commitment to something greater than yourselves. May this marriage be a foundation for positive impact on the lives of many other families. The wedding reception was attended by employees of the foundation, beneficiaries of the social programs, friends from the rural community where it all began, and Julian's business colleagues who had witnessed his personal and professional transformation. During the reception, several people shared stories about how Julian's shift in values had positively impacted their lives. Company employees spoke about more humane policies implemented at the firm. Foundation beneficiaries described educational opportunities that were transforming their family trajectories. A young college student, the first in her family to access higher education through a scholarship offered by the foundation, gave a speech that moved everyone present. Mrs. Martha, Mr. Julian and Mrs. Brenda are proof that successful people can choose to use resources and influence to create opportunities for others. My college education will not only change my life, but will impact future generations of my family. The speech perfectly illustrated the kind of legacy Julian had chosen to build, not just personal wealth accumulation, but the creation of systems that multiply opportunities for other families. On their honeymoon, Julian and Brenda visited social projects in different regions of the country, studying models of community impact that could inspire the expansion of the family foundation. Each location visited offered lessons on how to connect business resources with real social needs. During a visit to an educational project in the South, Brenda made an observation that would define the next phase of the foundation's growth. Julian, we need to create specific programs for domestic workers. Many women in my previous situation have untapped potential because they never received development opportunities. The idea of focusing on training for domestic workers resonated deeply with Julian. Brenda had demonstrated that talent and dedication exist regardless of social background or formal education. How many other women could flourish with the right opportunities? Let's create a pilot program when we get back, Julian decided. Professional training, financial education, leadership development for domestic workers interested in expanding their careers. The honeymoon also became a journey of discovery on how to expand the foundation's social impact. They returned to Chicago with ambitious plans for programs that could transform the lives of thousands of working women. Mrs. Martha was waiting for them at home with news of her own. She had started writing a book about compassionate education, sharing pedagogical methods developed over decades of teaching that prioritized holistic human development over simple knowledge transmission. "I want my educational experiences to be preserved and shared," she explained. "Maybe they can inspire other educators to prioritize character building alongside academic education." The book project became another family collaboration. Julian offered resources for publication and distribution. Brenda contributed perspectives on how compassionate education had impacted her own life. And Mrs. Martha shared decades of accumulated pedagogical wisdom. 2 years after the wedding, the foundation had expanded significantly. The educational program served over 1,000 young people annually. The training program for domestic workers had trained hundreds of women who went on to secure better professional opportunities. Mrs. Martha's book had become a reference for educators interested in humanistic teaching methods. But the most significant transformation had happened within the Sterling family itself. Julian had found balance between business success and personal fulfillment. Brenda had discovered a calling for social leadership she never imagined she possessed. Mrs. Martha had experienced the most productive and happiest years of her life. During a family meeting to plan the next year for the foundation, Mrs. Martha made an observation that perfectly summed up the journey they had shared. "Do you realize we started with an accidental fall in the bathroom and built a family legacy that impacts thousands of lives? That proves true transformation can begin in the most unexpected moments." Julian held his wife's and his mother's hands, feeling deep gratitude for the rainy night that had changed everything. A brave employee had saved much more than a life. She had saved an entire family from living without authentic connection and meaningful purpose. "I love you both more than words can express," said Julian with tears of gratitude in his eyes. "You taught me that true wealth is measured in genuine relationships and positively impacted lives." "And we love you, son," replied Mrs. Martha, speaking for both herself and Brenda, "for having the courage to change, to grow, to become the man you always had the potential to be." At that moment, in the living room of the mansion that had witnessed so much growth and transformation, the three understood that they had created something rare and precious, a family based not only on biological or legal ties, but on conscious choices of love, mutual growth, and service to others. The story that began with a household accident had become a narrative of redemption, personal growth, true love, and positive social impact. And the most beautiful part was knowing that this was only the beginning of a legacy that would continue impacting lives for generations to come. 3 years after the wedding, news arrived that would perfectly complete the Sterling family's transformation. Brenda was pregnant. The child growing in her womb would represent a new generation raised from the start, with the values rediscovered during the family's growth journey. "This baby will be raised knowing the importance of taking care of each other," said Brenda, gently caressing her still small belly. "He or she will grow up seeing that true success includes a positive impact on others' lives." Mrs. Martha, at 78 years old, was radiant at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. She was already planning stories to tell, lessons to teach, family traditions to establish with the new family member. "This child will know the stories of great-grandfather Arthur, will learn about our roots at the Kentucky homestead, and will grow up understanding that family means taking care of each other unconditionally," she said, her eyes shining with maternal joy. Julian was emotional about the approaching fatherhood. Unlike his own upbringing, where he received material comfort but little emotional presence from his parents, he was determined to be a present, affectionate father involved in his child's full development. "I want to teach this child through example," Julian said. "That work has purpose when it serves others, that family is a priority over individual achievements, that love is shown through daily acts of care." The pregnancy brought even more unity to the family. Julian further reduced his workload to be present at all medical appointments and important moments of the pregnancy. Mrs. Martha shared motherhood advice based on decades of observation and experience. Brenda prepared to balance motherhood with leading the foundation. During the 7th month of pregnancy, they took one last special trip to Kentucky, wanting the child to meet their family roots even before birth. Mrs. Martha had suggested the trip, believing that connection to family roots would spiritually strengthen the baby. On the homestead where it all began decades earlier, under the tree where Arthur proposed to Martha and where Julian married Brenda, they made a solemn promise to the child who would be born. "We promise to raise you knowing your roots, honoring healthy family traditions, serving communities in need, prioritizing relationships over material possessions," Julian said, with his hands on Brenda's belly. "We promise that you will grow up surrounded by unconditional love, understanding that our family exists to serve and care for each other," added Brenda. "And I promise that you will know the stories of your great-grandfather, learn about the value of honest work and the dignity of all people, regardless of their social position," concluded Mrs. Martha. The baby was born on a sunny spring morning, exactly 1 year after her parents' wedding. It was a girl, who was named Martha Audrey Collins Sterling, honoring both the beloved great-grandmother and the great-grandfather who had established the family values that now guided the family. Little Martha was born healthy and vigorous, as if she carried with her all the positive energy accumulated during the years of family transformation. Mrs. Martha held her great-granddaughter in her arms with tears of joy, seeing in that innocent little face the continuation of a legacy of love and service. "She has her great-grandfather's eyes," observed Mrs. Martha, noting the shape of the baby's eyes, "and her mother's determined smile." Julian was completely in love with his daughter from the very first moment. He held little Martha with infinite care, silently promising to be the present and loving father he had wished for during his own childhood. Brenda, exhausted but radiant after childbirth, watched her husband and mother-in-law interacting with their daughter and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had found not only romantic love, but a true family that valued her and a purpose in life that transcended personal goals. In the months following the birth, the family dynamics naturally adapted to the baby's presence. Mrs. Martha became the most devoted grandmother imaginable, caring for little Martha with endless tenderness and patience. Julian balanced business and social responsibilities with quality time as a father. Brenda managed to continue leading the Foundation's programs while enjoying motherhood. The child brought even more unity to the family. During the nights when she woke up, the three of them took turns caring for her, creating a system of mutual support that worked perfectly. Julian discovered that feeding his daughter in the middle of the night was infinitely more rewarding than any business meeting. When little Martha turned 6 months old, the family organized a special party at the homestead in Kentucky. It was a celebration that marked not only the baby's growth, but the entire family transformation that had happened since that dramatic night at the hospital. During the party, Julian gave an emotional speech to the friends and family present. "5 years ago, I was a successful businessman but emotionally empty. I treated my mother as a financial responsibility, not as a loved one. I saw employees as resources, not as human beings worthy of respect. I accumulated wealth without true purpose." He paused, looking at Brenda and Mrs. Martha. "A rainy night changed everything. A courageous employee disobeyed my orders to save my mother's life. In that moment, I realized I had lost touch with the values that truly matter: family, compassion, service to others." The guests listened attentively, many of them beneficiaries of the Foundation's programs or employees who had witnessed Julian's transformation. "Today we have a true family based on genuine love, a foundation that impacts thousands of lives, a company that treats employees with dignity, and a daughter who will grow up knowing the importance of caring for one another." He raised his glass for a final toast. "I toast to Brenda's courage, who risked everything to do what was right, to my mother's wisdom, who taught me the true meaning of family, and to our daughter Martha, who represents the continuation of a legacy of love and service." The toast was met with warm applause and tears of emotion from many present. The story of the Sterling family had become an inspiration to all who knew it, demonstrating that genuine transformation is possible when people choose human values over material gains. That night, after all the guests had left, the family gathered on the homestead's porch for a final moment of reflection. Little Martha slept peacefully in her great-grandmother's lap, under the same stars that had witnessed generations of meaningful family moments. "Do you know what the most incredible part of our entire story is?" asked Mrs. Martha. now 80 years old but still vibrant and lucid. "What, Mom?" asked Julian and Brenda. It wasn't just one life that was saved that night, it was 3 lives, and now a 4th that will grow up better because we all chose to change. Mrs. Martha's observation perfectly summed up the magnitude of the transformation that had occurred. A courageous decision on a rainy night had created waves of positive change that would continue to expand for generations. 5 years after that memorable night at the hospital, the Sterling family had become an example of how crises can be transformed into opportunities for growth, how social differences can be transcended by shared values, how true love can flourish in the most unexpected contexts. Julian had learned that business success without social purpose is empty. Brenda had discovered that courage and dedication can open doors to opportunities beyond her most ambitious dreams. Mrs. Martha had found new purpose and energy in the final years of her life, and little Martha would grow up in an environment where love, compassion, and service to others were fundamental values, ensuring that the family legacy would continue to positively impact the world for decades to come. The mansion in Chicago had transformed from a cold and formal house into a true home, full of laughter, deep conversations, shared projects, and moments of genuine family intimacy. The Sterling Foundation kept expanding, impacting thousands of lives through innovative educational and social programs, and it had all started with a cleaning lady who chose to disobey orders to save someone she loved. Her courage had planted seeds of transformation that blossomed into one of the most beautiful stories of family redemption, personal growth, and positive social impact. On the night before the 5th anniversary of that game-changing event, Julian wrote in his personal diary, "Today, I understand that Brenda didn't just save my mother's physical life. She saved our entire family from living without true connection. She saved me from becoming a rich but empty man. She saved my mother from spending her final years lonely and unappreciated. And she created an opportunity for us to build a legacy that transcends our own existence." He closed the diary and went to check if his daughter was sleeping peacefully. Little Martha rested serenely in her crib, surrounded by the love of 3 generations who had learned the true meaning of family. Outside, the same rain that had accompanied the transformative night 5 years earlier began to fall gently over Chicago. But this time, it represented renewal and blessings upon a family that had found its true purpose through love, courage, and mutual dedication. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story of transformation and perseverance. Do you believe Brenda made the right decision to disobey orders to save Mrs. Martha? What lessons about family and human values did this story bring to you? Leave your honest comment on how this narrative touched your heart. Feel free to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one.